He had rehearsed 100 ways to greet her, and forgot them all the moment she stood in the doorway. The wind carried the smell of dust and sage into the house, fluttering the hem of her dress like a small, defiant flag. She looked younger than he'd imagined, not in years but in hope, eyes bright despite the long journey, mouth set as if courage were something she could summon on command. He felt his throat close. Words had always come hard to him, but tonight they abandoned him completely. "I'm your wife," she said, softly, as though testing the truth of it. The paper in his pocket, stamped and signed, suddenly felt heavier than iron. He nodded, unsure if she could hear his heart pounding. He stepped aside to let her in, careful not to brush her sleeve, as if touch itself might shatter the fragile calm he'd built around his life. They ate in near silence. He watched the way she folded her hands before taking a bite, how she glanced up to make sure he had enough. He'd lived alone so long that the presence of another person felt like a miracle and a threat all at once. Afterward, he cleared the table with unnecessary thoroughness, stalling, while she stood by the window, tracing the outline of the hills with her eyes. When night settled, it settled hard. The house creaked as it always did, but now each sound seemed to announce itself. He stopped at the bedroom door, hand hovering, mind racing with everything he'd meant to say since the letter arrived weeks ago. The truth pressed against his chest. He had promised himself honesty, no matter how much it cost him. "There's something you should know," he began, staring at the floor. The words came out rough, scraped raw by fear. He told her about the doctor, about the certainty that had followed him like a shadow. He told her he didn't expect anything from her, that she was free to leave if she wished. He waited for the recoil, the polite sorrow, the quiet goodbye. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the soap in her hair. "Thank you for telling me," she said. There was no pity in her voice, only understanding, and something steadier beneath it. "I didn't come here for promises," she added. "I came because I wanted a life with you." His hands trembled. He turned away, ashamed of the weakness, of the relief that threatened to undo him. When he faced her again, she was watching him with a softness that made his chest ache. She reached out, hesitated, then let her fingers rest lightly on his arm. "I'm your wife," she repeated, quieter now. "Can I do it?" He didn't understand at first. The question hung between them, gentle and brave. When it sank in, when he realized she was offering not obligation but choice, something in him broke open. He nodded, once, afraid his voice would betray him. They moved slowly, awkwardly, learning the space between them. Nothing was hurried, nothing needed to be. In the dim light, her courage outshone his fear. When she trembled, not with uncertainty but with the weight of the moment, he forgot everything else, the doctor's words, the years of loneliness, the careful walls he'd built. All that existed was her breath and the quiet trust she placed in him. Afterward, they lay awake, the dark softened by the sound of each other's breathing. He expected regret to creep in, or disappointment, but what he felt instead was a strange, unfamiliar peace. She turned toward him, resting her head against his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. The days that followed unfolded like a promise learning how to keep itself. She rose early, eager to help, laughing when the chickens scattered at her approach. He showed her the land, the places where the grass grew sweetest, the fence that always needed mending. She listened as if every word mattered, and slowly, he began to believe that it did. At night, they talked. About where she'd come from, about the small dreams she'd carried across miles of uncertainty. About his childhood, the father who'd taught him the land and the mother who'd taught him silence. With each shared story, the distance between them shrank, replaced by something warm and steady. Weeks passed. Then one morning, she grew quiet at the breakfast table, her hand lingering on her cup. He noticed the color in her cheeks, the way her eyes shone with something like fear and wonder tangled together. She tried to smile, failed, and reached for his hand. "I think something's changed," she said. The world seemed to tilt. He searched her face, dread and hope warring inside him. When understanding dawned, he pulled his hand back, not in rejection but disbelief. He paced the room, laughter breaking out of him like a storm he couldn't contain, then stopped, overcome by a fear just as powerful. What if hope was cruel? What if it took everything again? She watched him, steady as ever. "Whatever it is," she said, "we'll face it together." The doctor came, confirmed what neither of them had dared to name. When the words were spoken aloud, he sat down hard, tears blurring his vision. He had spent so long believing himself broken that the idea of wholeness felt unreal. She knelt in front of him, pressing her forehead to his knee, grounding him. "I told you," she whispered. "I came for a life." The months that followed were filled with small, sacred moments. He learned the shape of her joy, the way she hummed when she was content. She learned his silences, when to fill them and when to let them be. The land changed with the seasons, and so did they, growing into a family neither had known how to ask for. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills gold, he stood behind her on the porch, his hands resting gently over her growing belly. She leaned back against him, trusting, unafraid. The shy man who had trembled at the sound of her voice now held the future in his arms. He kissed her hair, gratitude swelling in his chest. Not for the miracle alone, but for the courage that had brought her to his door, for the question she'd asked with such simple bravery, and for the life they had chosen, together, against all expectations, and filled with more hope than either of them had ever believed possible.